James, we're grateful that you're able to be here with us. We look forward to hearing from you. Tell these folks where you're from, James, where you're calling in from.
Hey, thanks, Jared, for the invite. Today I'm in Aramo, Idaho. I split my time between during the week, most weeks, and some weekends I'm in Battle Mountain, Nevada area, and on the weekends I'm here with family in Idaho. So blessed to have that opportunity.
Yeah, well, we're grateful to have you here with us. So James is an excellent expert, I would say, ranch manager. He's a great leader of other people. Good stockman, great stockman. He and I both learned directly from Bud Williams. Great with dogs, and just a good person to be around. So I think we're in for a treat to be able to learn from him today, and encourage you to pull out your notebook, take notes, your phone, whatever you take notes on, and be ready to learn. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen, James, we'll jump right in.
Well, today I'm a little nervous as this is a different form of presenting that I'm used to. For this one's I think pants are optional, so we will adapt with this change and try to watch for faces and reactions to some of the things we talk about today here on the small screen. So I want to share about forage budgeting. Um, when it comes down to ranching, uh, I think this is an important principle that sets up all aspects of sustainability and regeneration. Um, all right, a little bit about myself and a small company that my family and I have, as well as some other partners. We're a service-based company dedicated to assist ranchers and land managers to improve efficiency in ecological, financial, and social aspects of ranching. So uh, we're a young company, but that's our passion, to help other people succeed on the land and learn together with them. I have a couple of quotes here I want to share, both from Mark Twain, and I think it sets up the topic and my sentiments on ranching and uh, being humbled here to speak with you all today. As designers or artists, writers or thinkers, we should approach our work with humility, recognizing that the things we produce have roots that go back deeper than we can imagine. And the second, try as we may to create original work, we have been influenced by the things we have seen and read. Our task is um, to gather as great a variety of images and ideas as possible and arrange them in such a way that they exactly meet the requirements of the project we have in front of us. If we do our job well, the problem we were given and the solution we find will align perfectly. Um, and this is how uh, I try to focus my learning and sharing with today. Uh, Humbly, I struggle calling myself an expert, but humbly, the years are starting to pile up on different experiences that I've gathered and people I've learned from. Um, I earned a rangeland resource management degree from Utah State, and 10 years later, I attended the King Ranch Institute, where I earned a master's degree. Here on this map, you will see the clear over here from Florida to Montana and Nevada to Mexico and southern Texas. Pink are places that we've lived, my family and I have lived, and the green pins are projects that we've worked with. So we've tried to gather different experiences from different ecosystems, different cultures, different cattle markets, different cattle, and that's where we're coming from today. And um, I'm grateful for the opportunities to learn and have great mentors. I worked with Behave at Utah State with Fred Provenza, Bud Williams. Jared mentioned Bud Williams, the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management, Holistic Management International, Ranching for Profit, SRM, and last but not least, for sure, AgSteward and Jared and his family. I will share that I have hired Jared and not only as a friend, but as a professional to help me as a coach in overcome some of the trials and tribulations that come my way with my family and I the past few years. So I'm grateful for the many mentors, and there's many more than this, but these are a few I chose to mention. And a big principle here is I hope everybody today seeks for principles, not methods. The things that I want to share, they don't. Some of them don't work in Nevada, where they do in Florida, or vice versa. So look for principles that may be relative to your place, to your cattle, and again, that's what I challenge you to look at for principles. As we look at regenerative, I just went to the dictionary. It's to improve a place or system, especially by making it more active or successful. And I think that's a crucial opportunity for us to seek. How do we make something better, which is active and successful? We talk about three pillars of regeneration, or three aspects of sustainability in a ranch. We've got to be ecologically sound. We have to take care of the resources that I believe that God has challenged us to care for, to improve. Part of this is being able to pay the bills while we're taking care of the land and the animals. So the financial aspect, the dollars, and then our communities, the social aspect, our team members, our families, our countrymen, and those brothers and sisters across the world, for that matter. And a common link to these three pillars, I believe, is livestock itself. Livestock, if are a tool to accomplish all three of these and find this balance and be successful. I have to admit, or I have to point out that if any one of these are out of sync or not balanced, we're not regenerative. We're not sustainable. We can be taking care of the land, but if we're not budgeting our finances or making good financial decisions, the bank's going to come, and the bank doesn't care how good the land looks either. But the other side of that, if we're taking care of the land and we're making money, but we're making that money grazing our neighbor's grass, that's socially not acceptable. So all these three aspects have to be in balance. And I believe as we focus on livestock and how we use them as a tool, it links all those aspects together. You may ask, well, what does livestock have to do with the community or culture? I have a lot of friends that across the nation and in Mexico and in Canada that we're linked by a lifestyle of ranching. We're linked by horsemanship and dogs and good grass management. So it's all tied together. One of the crucial parts of taking care of the land is understanding that disturbance is required. And I'm going to say this is greater than even just the land, but our lives. As we survive trials, as we have disturbance across the land like fire or grazing, it activates the system, all the many working parts. And if it's given an opportunity to recover, it becomes stronger and better over time. And I believe that to be true even with our lives, but especially with the ecosystems we work with. I want to make sure we all have the same definition of what overgrazing is. Overgrazing is a plant that gets bit a second, third, fourth, fifth time before it's had the opportunity to fully recover from the first bite or the first disturbance. Doesn't matter where that bite comes from. If it comes from an elk, if our cows bite that second bite before it's recovered, our cow just overgrazed. If fire comes through and our cow bites that plant before it recovers from the fire, it's overgrazed. So this is an important definition to keep in mind, and we'll touch base on this a little bit later as well. Effects of overgrazing. We bankrupt a carbohydrate reserve, which inhibits growth. As a plant is bit by a cow, the carbohydrates from the roots go to grow more leaves. Pretty soon after time, that bank account goes empty, and there's not enough carbohydrates to allow for more growth, which means that there's not enough leaves out there to photosynthesize to make more sugars that go to the roots. And when we do that, there's less biomass and insulation that protects the soils. That biomass is habitat for microbes. And we could talk for days on all of these principles. I'm just going to touch them so we know that we're talking about the same things. These are spiral effects. As one thing goes down, so does another. And it doesn't take very long to see a healthy ecosystem degraded to where it can hardly photosynthesize and protect itself from the elements and from grazers. And as we know, there are long-term financial distresses that are associated with this. As we look at this area here in this picture, you can see a water source that has been grazed several times during the season. This would have been in October, 1st of October, and you can see it's been kept real short. So here's an example of some overgrazing. As we look at the systems, have a systems thinking approach, we can see that all things are related. We can't just do one thing in a system and think that there are no consequences. And here's another graph or another chart that we could look at for days and discuss the different relationships between the different parts of these grazing systems. But we don't do that today, but just to show you how complicated these systems can be. And I showed this to a cow boss once that I worked with, and he says, it looks like a ball of yarn. So anyway, it's complex and everything's related. Another key point is as we've got to keep that goal in view. We have to manage for the desired outcome. So we can't lose sight of the target. And this picture of my son many years ago in New Mexico, he's aiming for that for this black Brockle calf. If he were looking at this Charolais cross cow instead of that calf, his loop would not hit the mark. So we've got to make sure that we have a goal in place, what we're trying to achieve, and that we're making plans to achieve that goal. So don't lose sight. The world lost a great friend of mine and a great ranch economist this past month, Stan Beavers. I had the opportunity to learn from him, and these are from some of the notes that I took while learning from him, that if we don't use numbers to make decisions on your ranch, you're risking the ranch on a hunch. And I believe that to be true, whether we're grazing planning or financial planning. We've got to know our numbers. We can't do things from indigestion or a hunch. We need to know what the state of our operation is and how do we improve it. That which we monitor improves, and I firmly believe that. So we're going to touch on what a forage budget is now, and the numbers of grazing. I wanted to start today. Some of this may just be a review for a bunch of us. Others, maybe it's new, but I want to start at the beginning, and we can build on that. But today, this is going to be quite focused on some of the foundation principles of grazing management and forage budgeting. As we think of our family budgets, with bills and incomes and try to balance those. That's the same idea with grazing planning. We're trying to budget the forage that we have available and the forage that we need. This is not just a science, but it's an art. This is something that we can learn for years and get better as we read our cattle, as we read the landscapes we work with, and we learn the science and the technologies that help us manage those tools. So some of the numbers we need to look at. We start with our livestock inventory. We measure these in standard animal units. And what I use, I guess every place could have their own standard, just as in our nation we use dollars, and in Mexico they're pesos. But we need to make sure we're using that conversion rate and we're putting everything in the same unit. So what I use as a standard animal unit is equivalent to 1,000-pound bovine. I remember in school, one thing that I laughed about is I think 25 jackrabbits equal one standard animal unit. 5 deer, 5 sheep, 3/4 of an elk. So we can really convert all of these different units into a standard animal unit in this way. A horse, where a horse eats more, it's not on weight. I think a saddle horse is 1.25 standard animal units. So literally we can take whatever we're working with. I haven't done it for fowl yet, but I'm sure there's a conversion there we could look at. But a standard animal unit, that's how we're measuring our livestock inventories. And when it comes down to our forage inventory, it's measured in animal days, and we're going to touch on both of these points here going forward. So, livestock inventory. Here's some math. I challenge you to get your calculator out, or pen and paper. So a 1,200-pound cow divided by a 1,000-pound standard animal unit is 1.2 standard animal units. 1,500-pound cow, we can see the math works the same. There's a 2,000-pound bull, 2 standard animal units. And let's go the other direction. With a 500-pound steer divided by 1,000 pounds, that's 0.5 standard animal units. So you can see here what we're trying to accomplish, putting everything into the same units. So let's practice. I'm going to ask everybody to go ahead and calculate this. If you have 200 cows in your herd, and your cows average 1,200 pounds, how many standard animal units are in your herd? Give everybody just a few seconds. All right. Here's our math. 1,200 divided by 1,000, 1.2 standard animal units. We have 200 cows times 1.2 standard animal units. That means that herd is equal to 240 standard animal units. Let's do this for some steers. Give everybody a minute. You have 500 steers in your herd. They average 600 pounds. How many standard animal units are in your herd? Take a few seconds.
Hey, these guys are on it.
Okay.
Francois and Boyd got 300. Is that right?
Here we go. 600 divided by 1,000 equals 6.6 standard animal units. 500 times 0.6, 300, right on. That's exactly right. So again, we could spend some more time working on these different examples with different classes of cattle or sheep for that matter, and come up with how many standard animal units we have. So this becomes our livestock inventory in units of standard animal units. Okay, now we'll touch on our forage inventory. We've figured out one side of our equation. Now we're going to balance and learn how to calculate the other side, which is our forage inventory. So we could see those standard animal units or our livestock inventory is those bills that we have each month. And now that we're going to look at the other side of the T chart and try to figure out what we have in the bank uh, to pay those bills. Forage inventory again is measured in animal days. That is our grazing currency. So an animal day would be similar to the dollar in our family budget. So an animal day is the amount of forage needed to sustain one standard animal unit. So again, it's not an animal, it's the amount of forage for that standard animal unit. Okay, looks like I got one out of place here, but this forage inventory is our forage savings account, and this inventory needs to be surveyed, monitored before growing season and after growing season. And you may ask, why don't we do this forage inventory before or during the growing season? And that's because we can't count forage that hasn't grown yet. We don't want to get in a system where we're taking credit, where we're using credit to pay bills. We are planning and budgeting for what we have in the bank, for what is in place today. So usually that inventory, that forage inventory, I collect in about October, or October is usually a good month, and then maybe March, middle of March before growing season. That's different from wherever we live, but for in the arid West, that's usually the time of year that I'll do a forage inventory. Okay, there's another term. Oh, go ahead.
Just a quick question there. If you're using your analogy, you're not going on credit. How do you calculate your maybe you'll get to this, but your stocking rate? Maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself here and thinking, you're banking on that forage is going to grow over the growing season, and you need to line up cattle, or know if you need to destock if you have cattle based on perhaps rainfall and other indicators. Are you going to cover that later?
I think we can. We will touch on it later. I think we can talk briefly now. What it's better if we have that forage on hand. If it hasn't grown yet, that we have some brown grass, some dormant grass that we didn't graze the year before, in place, ready to graze. And we know that drought is part of our systems here in the West. And so if we're not prepared for that drought, we could find us in a pickle where we've contracted for a whole bunch of steers to come. But there is a chance that we don't have anything there. So I think it's wise for us to, in our planning, that we're prepared for drought, because it's going to happen. That's just life in the West and different parts of the world. So.
Yeah, sounds good. And then Keaton, did you have another question before we
just
move on?
Yeah, just kind of going along with that. So you're saying to have 6 months worth of forage to graze, because you're counting it in the spring and in the fall. Am I kind of getting that right?
Correct.
So you wouldn't want to run more cows than what you have forage for in the spring.
Correct. This is a wise principle. I guess if we want to live on the edge and have some risk, we can try to bank on, take that credit of what we're thinking will grow. But it's best if we have some forage in the bank, in the savings account, out in front of us. And I believe that's just important. We could talk all day about different methods or principles for drought planning. But I think for now, let's just say that it is wise to have an inventory, that we're leaving some grass in those pastures, that we have some inventory out in front of us. Okay. Any other questions? Thanks for those.
That's perfect. Thanks for taking that.
Okay. Animal days per acre. There's a couple different ways to look at this. It's the estimated amount of forage on 1 acre measured in animal days, or the number of 1,000 pound steers that could sustain their needs for 1 day on 1 acre. So again, it's the amount of forage. It's measuring the amount of forage in there in animal days. So we could have, in parts of Florida or irrigated pasture, those animal days per acre could be up over, 100, 200, 300 animal days per acre, where there's a lot of forage available in pounds or in animal days. And then some of these rangelands that we have in New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Nevada, we're talking about maybe 2 animal days per acre. So this is something that we will use when we're estimating how much forage we have in a pasture, and how that then will equate to how long we can stay with the number of cattle we have. So, and we'll practice through some of this. Any questions on what an animal day per acre is? Go ahead and raise your hand if you don't want to move forward.
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. So this example, if we have a pasture, if we go look at an acre of ground in this pasture, and we estimate that there are 10 animal days per acre, that means that I could put 10 standard animal units for 1 day on that acre. Or if there's 10 animal days per acre, it also means that I could put 5 standard animal units for 2 days. So we're simply taking the number of days, our number of standard animal units, and it needs to add up to that 10. Okay? So if we're looking at a pasture now, we're going to take the number of days per acre and the size of the pasture in acres. We're going to multiply those. So the forage amount that is estimated at 10 animal days per acre. We've used our art, we've used our observation, and maybe some grazing records to try to figure out how much forage is in your pasture. And if that pasture is 500 acres, we're going to take 10 animal days per acre times 500 acres. That equals 5,000 animal days. That is the amount of forage that this 500 acre pasture has. So that would be the unit that we're using to measure our forage inventory for that pasture. We're gonna do a couple practices here. So here's our forage inventory: 10 animal days per acre times 500 acres equals 5,000 animal days. This is what we have that say we've contracted to bring some cattle onto the ranch, and this is what we've contracted. So 100 head of 900-pound heifers plus 4 yearling bulls. The bulls are 1,000 pounds, and we're hoping it'll last us for 75 days. So this is to check and see if our plan is sound or not. So 1,000 heifers, they are a 0.9 standard animal unit. 4 bulls, they are 1 standard animal unit for the 4. So we total per each day 94 standard animal units per each day that those cattle are there. So when we calculate this out, 75 days times 94 standard animal units a day equals 7,050 animal days. So these are our bills. This is our savings account, and we're trying to figure out if this is a good plan or not. So does it balance? I see some thumbs down, thumbs up. What do you think? Does this plan balance? You're right. Okay, we can see that we have 5,000. We need 7,050. So this plan is not very good if we don't have any rain, or or if we're not planned and ready for this. So so let's do this again. Let's figure out. This is how we're going to work backwards now. This is what the grazing plan would look like. So again, we have our pasture that has 5,000 animal days. Here we still have our 94 standard animal units needed. So we are going to take that 5,000 animal days, divided it by 94. And so this tells us that pasture has approximately 53 days. Now, to answer your question, Jared, would I feel comfortable if, could we bank on a little bit of growth for this current year? I think in this situation we could, but this tells us how many days we have forage right now as we're planning. So it probably wouldn't be wise. Kind of like saying I really want that new pickup truck that is more than I make right now for monthly payment, but I could get a new job that maybe would pay for it. So it's kind of similar. We want to plan. I know that because I've gone out and done the legwork, that I have 10 animal days an acre, and that would last me about 53 days. So this is balanced. This is a balanced forage budget for one pasture and one herd of cows. Grazing definition of grazing the plant a second time before it can recover. I think it's important to realize here that we don't overgraze pastures, we overgraze plants. That's an important thing to remember. Okay. Any questions up to now? Raise a hand if you've got a question. That would be a good time on any of those numbers that we just covered if it's not clear. Okay.
I think probably the biggest question that could come up is, how do you actually calculate the supply? The demand seems pretty straightforward, but especially if you're going to cover this later on, we can hold that question.
So how do we estimate what's there for the forage inventory? Is that the question?
Yeah, and it looks like that was one of the ones in the chat as well. So how do we estimate that? It's what's your preferred way? Is it clipping and weighing? Is it the forage square? Okay. Is it just, tell us, especially for the novices who might be brand new into this, what's maybe a way to be able to be a little more scientific rather than the feel that those of us that grew up around livestock, we can probably drive through a field and say, yeah, there's, that herd of 500 cows, they're going to be okay there for 5 days.
Yep.
And you come back in 3 days and you check and you put out mineral and it's like, oh, well, actually they need to be moved this afternoon.
Correct. Great point. So with clipping, clipping can give us a false confidence because it's on one small area. Now, there's a lot of people that do this. They clip, they bag it, they dry it, they weigh it, and I'm not against that. But I believe that for me, when I'm out on the range and driving through, I'm constantly looking out at the whole pasture and different parts as I drive by, and I'm making these mental notes and say, this to me looks like a 5. And when I was learning this, it was very beneficial to have a mentor with me, and he would look at it, I'd look at it, we'd write our numbers down of what we were observing, and then we'd we'd compare those estimations, uh, and over time, with practice, you get better. Now there is another way to learn, and that is stepping off footages, and there are calculations with how many you figure out how many feet are in each of your pace. I like to have four people, and you try to make a square, and you say, okay, how many paces do we need to make each of us to make that square that one cow or one standard animal unit would be able to graze for a day? And then you can calculate uh, how many animal days per acre that is by knowing your estimate of how many feet you guys are stepping off. So there are it takes practice, and definitely an exercise to do in the field, where you can make those calculations and learn that art of estimating how many animal days are out there in your pasture. Um, and for this meeting, I think I think that's a good place to just put it, that we've got to learn this art. It is an art.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe we can do a follow-up one out in the field, actually, where we demonstrate that and walk people through the math. Is kind of a bonus one, but hopefully, Kyle, that gives you an idea. And I agree, with James. I think knowing your context and knowing what the cattle are going to graze, or the species that you have out there is going to graze, is important. And the season of year also. For example, in the fall, our cattle will browse a lot on bitter brush. But if in the spring, if you're counting that as a forage source, they're not going to touch it. So that forage availability can vary depending on the year as well.
Absolutely. And another way to work backwards of this is if you can calculate past, if you know how many days you grazed a pasture and know how many head, and you can calculate this backwards to get an estimate of how many animal days you used last year or the year before. One thing that I think is so important. There's been a lot of times I've gotten on a place that says this pasture, we can be in this pasture for 30 days. And it kind of gets that 30 days use every year. Well, we have different precip levels. We have different cattle, different time of year. That we got to be careful that we don't just say, yep, 30 days. That we're calculating that we know these numbers. And that's a lot of what this presentation's about, is learning how to make those numbers, to make these decisions, how long we should stay in. So, okay, regenerative grazing principles. During active growth periods, plants can be overgrazed every 3 to 4 days. So when we think about this, as those sugars are being pulled from the roots, new leaves are being made. As soon as it gets to be about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, a cow can get its tongue wrapped around that plant again, and it can be bit a second time or a third time. So overgrazing really doesn't have to do with number of animals. It's how long that plant is exposed to animals. So that regrowth is tender and sweet. Those new sugars are just put up in there. Cattle want to go back to that plant. There's benefit for them to go back and graze that again. And that's what our definition of overgrazing is. So if we learn that it's important that after disturbance that a plant has time to recover, how do we manage those recovery periods? And this is by managing the amount of time plants are exposed to grazing. So those cattle need to be removed from that area once they've taken that first bite. We can do this with creating multiple paddocks with electric fence, herding, virtual fence. We're getting more and more tools of how to do this. Again, it's our ability to manage these livestock as tools that helps us become successful or detrimental to our landscape. This herding, the stockmanship is crucial. Being able to settle cattle, being able to pick them up and move them and stop them and turn them. The electric fence takes time and some financial investment, but it is a great tool to create multiple paddocks. I think a lot of times people want to throw out permanent fence, and there's a big investment in that. Sometimes it's going to pay for itself, sometimes not. So I think we need to know our numbers where we can calculate that and do a financial analysis if some of those permanent structures are worth it or not. So regenerative grazing principles, how many paddocks are needed to eliminate overgrazing during the rapid growing season in our 500-acre pasture with 100 bred heifers and the 4 bulls? So if our goal is to move them every 4 days to prevent overgrazing, we're going to take that 54 days, divide that by 4. That tells us that we need about, we'll say, 14 different paddocks throughout our 54-day period to allow those plants to be bitten once and then move on. So if we take 500 acres divided by that 14 paddocks, and it's about 37 paddocks that we will need in this 500-acre pasture to graze to the best of our ability. Now, some of these landscapes that I work on are literally 1 million acres. How are we gonna, can we be perfect at this? And the answer is absolutely no. But can we do our best to reduce the amount of times that pastures are grazed, that plants are grazed multiple times? So by creating larger herds, breaking up pastures, this is how we control our grazing and our recovery periods. And to go back to touch on that, if a ranch, a lot of times these ranches I come on, they're continuous grazing, where the cattle just never get off of that pasture. So if I can remove the cattle, put some groups of cattle together, and reduce that 365-day grazing interval to 30 days, there's a big improvement there, and it's a great first step. And we have seen great responses on the range by doing that. Here's an example of our forage budget and our grazing plan. So we've got our pasture names down here, the acre sizes, our estimates of animal days per acre, and this tells us how many animal days we're estimating that there are in that pasture. So here's our herd size, number of head. They're 1,200-pound cows, so there's 1.2 standard animal units. And so that 540 times 1.2 equals 648. So doing our math, we have 49 days in West Curry. If this is our start date, 49 days from then is June 3rd. You can ask the question, are we in fast growth, rapid growth, or slow growth, or dormant? So if it's rapid, we got 4 days before we need to move. So if we can break that 3,150 acres up into 12 paddocks, and those paddocks are an estimate of 263 acres. So this just gives us an idea of where we need to start. Again, maybe 12 isn't an option. Maybe time isn't an option. Can I split it? Can I split that 3,100 acres in half to start with? Yes. Is that better than the full 49 days? Yes. Can we split it into 3? And so you get the point. Our goals are to to eliminate and get those cattle distributed across the land for one bite at a time per season as possible. So, so this is in 2021, the cow herd, and shows the different pastures. And you can see through the year a blueprint. This isn't necessarily a blueprint. It's a guide. If this pasture here, if that first pasture, if I've been in there for 30 days and I look out there and it's done, we're not going to wait 49 days. We're going to get them moved when the cattle and the land tell us that it's time to be moved. So this is our goal. This is our plan that we're not going to stick to. We have, in permanent marker, we have to be able to adjust as what we're seeing out there on the ground. Here's a story I want to share, putting all these principles together. And this was a ranch I was on in New Mexico, and I worked for Todd Graham with Ranch Advisory Partners. Todd is a great mentor, great friend of mine. This is an area that looked pretty rough. This bench had season-long grazing with yearlings. They kind of got stuck in that. So many yearlings would be in this pasture this time of year every year, whether there's plant feed or not, and we just got to where there was very little feed available at all. Plants had low vigor. Those sugars were bankrupt. Those roots were bankrupt of sugars. A lot of bare ground. When it rained, it flowed across the landscape instead of absorbed. And we estimated about 2 animal days per acre. So this picture here, you can see it looks pretty rough. This would have been April of 2018. And we did not graze this for 3 full growing seasons during the growing season. In 2019, we grazed it lightly in the dormant season. So December, January, 2019 or 2020, we did the same. 2021, we flash grazed it early in the growing season. We did not stay there for a long time. We were able to move through pretty quick. This next short video shows what this looked like in 2022. Of course, there were some rains, but we had allowed this soil to recover from those years of grazing. So this line of trees that you can see here were the line of trees in that first picture with the tape measure. You can see what this looks like with a little bit of recovery. This blue grandma, which is a warm season, it came back and responded very well to recovery and appropriate grazing levels at the right time of year. So, to put some numbers to with what we saw here in the low max pasture, we estimated about 13,920 animal days in 2017. In 2022, we estimated a total of 83,520 animal days. So that is an increase of 69,600 animal days. We can put a value on this. Now with that forage inventory, we know we can estimate how many animal days we have. And if we're going to be a custom grazing outfit, for example, and know what we can charge per animal day, we can put an amount, what that grass is worth. And this, just to make math easy, 69,600 animal days, $600 is what the value of that pasture recovery had. That ranch, by practicing using these practices, has over 300,000 animal days of increase from when we started. Again, these are dollars that we can put into account. This is how we improve the financial well-being of the ranch by improving our ecological systems and cycles. Good grazing pays. Again, our grazing management is a link that holds the system together. And as a closing, I just wanted to touch on the social side. When we look at relationships, relationships can be strengthened, they can be improved, and they can be active, or they can be dormant. But I do believe that relationships are also regenerative. So that just kind of closes our three pillars of sustainability and regeneration. And with that, I appreciate everybody for attending, and open up for any questions that you may have.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. We appreciate that. Go ahead and share with people for the recording how to get a hold of you, James.
Yeah, my website is stewardshipranching.com. People joke I should have called it Stewardship for my last name, but no, Stewardship is much greater than my last name. So stewardshipranching.com, james.stewardshipranching@gmail.com is my email address, and my phone numbers is can also be attained on either one of those sources.
Very cool. Well, that's great. Yeah, if anybody has a question, raise your hand. We'll unmute you. And hey, Art, good to hear from you. I think you should be able to unmute now, I think. So tell folks where you're from, Art.
Stuart, we're from Saunders, Saskatchewan, which is 10 miles north of the 49th parallel, northeast of Havar, Montana. So, James, an excellent presentation and review of what we need to know about our draft inventory, but could you just talk for a minute? I'll tell you one way we can, another way to estimate, and for those of us that are recovering farmers and hayers, is that we know how many bales per acre they are sometimes when we cut a field. And so we can determine how many pounds are out there through how many bales and what they weigh. But then we can determine how much of that we want to harvest off of the field to give us another method of determining how much might be there. So that's a way for us recovering farmers to do it a little bit. But James, recovery period. After many years of doing this, recovery period is still a hard one for me. And to know when a plant is recovered, is it when those leaf tips come back to a pointy picture or a pointy point? Is it when a seed head has been produced in our arid country here? It seems like we get once a year grazing, and maybe that's it, and maybe that's standard for dry country. I don't know, but could you just talk about that a little bit? Recovery, on how do we determine recovery, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for your first point. Real quick, it's absolutely possible if you can say there's a ton to the acre, that you can work backwards on your math with what an animal unit will graze in a day, and so that is a great point, and something that I have used also. What does recovery look like? So as we are grazing different pastures in different times of year, if we don't want to feed hay and we have the snow levels to allow us to, we need to have some pastures that are not grazed during the grazing season or growing season at all. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll look at fence line contrast. I'll look across the fence that has not been grazed that season and compare it to where the cattle just came off of. Until it's hard to tell the difference between those two contrasts on each side of the fence, that's how I use. If it's recovered, I want it to look like that other side of the fence that has not been grazed yet. So that's the art that I use, kind of a way that I use. I'll take out and look at a pasture that I haven't grazed, that I have planned for later grazing, and compare those two pastures. Now, your point about different parts of the country, in New Mexico, there in 4-year period, there was one pasture that I grazed twice within the same year, the same calendar year. I was in there early. We had some great rains, and after the dormant season, I went there and used it again. A lot of that was the rotation and proximity to the corrals. But in a lot of these arid places, you're right. We're looking at least a year recovery. Sometimes maybe 18 months, maybe a couple of years, as in that example with that bench, the example that I gave with that pasture in New Mexico. So we've got to be careful not to just get in the habit of what time are you going to use it, or the rotations that we use, but that we're looking at the grass out there and comparing it to those pastures, that grass that has not been grazed yet. Did that answer your question, Art? Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions? You can raise your virtual hand. I think you should be able to unmute yourselves now also. What about here in more of a brittle, arid environment? How critical do you see changing up season of use being, so that you're not in that same field at the same time every year, James?
Yeah. So, for example, in that pasture that had that early season grazing every year with yearlings, the cool season grasses had been wiped out. And we'll see that if we use a pasture the same time of year, and especially if we're overgrazing them and depleting the carbohydrate reserves in the roots, as we're doing that, those plants are going to die. More and more either weedy species or warm season grasses, and you'll see those shifts in the plant community. So it's crucial that we're changing that up and utilizing that country at different times. Those shrubs you mentioned, the browse in the winter, those shrubs need disturbance too. And so if we can use that pasture in the winter where the shrubs can get a little more usage, and the cool seasons can not be beat up while they're growing, there's just a lot of benefit. And a lot of this comes to be with our, if we're using grass pastures in dormant season, we may have to supplement. We may have to do things to allow the animals' nutrition needs to match up with what's available. So these are, we have to look at the animal too.
Right, absolutely. Quick question, then we'll go to Boyd. And from the chat, do you use prescribed burns to help regenerate pastures?
When we were in South Texas, and those prescribed burns were practiced, it was great to see. But in this arid West, fire is the 4-letter F word a lot of times. So I think we gotta be careful with that. Not against it, but for me, I'd rather try to manage our grazing. So.
Yeah. Okay, Boyd.
Stephen, thank you very much for coming on. This has been great this evening. On that land, James, that for the 2 seasons there that you didn't graze, would a different animal impact hurt it anymore? Like, let's say you graze chickens out there instead on a fast rotation. That way you're still getting down your nutrients from the waste product of the animal, and you're still getting some disturbance. Or would you keep all livestock off that?
In that situation, I felt that we needed to try to get some biomass built back up. That was also, we needed to try to get some insulation to cover that bare ground. So at that time, I feel like the best solution was a little bit of recovery, just a couple seasons of recovery. Yeah, I think that's. I think that there's benefits of of there'd be benefits of looking at different species, but for that, I think it needed that couple periods of a couple growing seasons of recovery.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, very
Perfect.
good.
Thank you.
Christopher, we'll take a couple
Yeah,
more
thank
questions here.
you. Thanks. So just for context, I'm one of these very new ranchers and literally just got my first 2 cows. So before this, I've gone chickens and hogs and done that sort of stuff. And I've got 2 questions, and one is directly for the hay, and that relates to the concept of, I guess, learning about regenerative agriculture and the needs of the cattle in general. So I had my mind blown at reversing the idea of buying hay equipment, making hay, storing hay, and then delivering the hay back to the field. And it blew my mind that I could just leave the hay in the field. But I was wondering, does there come a point that the hay becomes like not good? Like it's brown, it's standing, and it does it go bad in the? Is there a difference between stored hay that's cut at a certain time of year that's green, and then you dry it and you store it and it goes brown? Is there a difference in that brown versus the brown of grass just being left to grow in the field and its quality and delivery back to the cattle?
Great question. So let's start with hay sitting in the field for a long time. A lot of that's going to depend on moisture and mold. And so that mold will drastically reduce the forage quality and how it reacts inside that cow or sheep or whatever you're working with there. So yes, the quality goes bad quickly. Now there's a lot of people that don't even put it in bales. They'll just swath it. They'll take a big meadow and go swath it and put it in a windrow, let it cure and dry out, and then come through a few months later and graze it, strip graze it in the winter. So the benefit of that is by cutting it, you'll start that growth process again. So you'll get a little bit more growth. You know, once those grasses seed out, they go dormant. They're done. You know, they start to recover from the growing season. So by cutting it, it allows growth to start again, and so you can get a few more animal days, out in those fields as you do that. Now, there's a difference between anaerobic decomposition and oxidation. So oxidation is where forage or grasses, whether it's been laid down or if it's standing, oxidation is where it's a chemical change and it's actually lost to the environment. But if it's on the ground, if that forage has been stepped on or cut and laid on the ground, it allows microbes from the soil to start breaking it down, temperature and all that also. So there's quite a chemistry lesson there to be taught. That I'm not the best chemist, but there are different breakdowns of our forage. Our goal is to reduce as much oxidization as possible and get as much of those nutrients from the biomass above the soil to go below the soil for those microbes. I really look at microbes as the ruminant stomach. It's very similar that
Yep.
those microbes build our soil. That activity makes our soil better. So,
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, Christopher?
Yes, that was very helpful. And I guess the second part of that then is if we're going to proceed into a regenerative grazing plan where we're bringing the cattle out there and we're not cutting the hay, you really need to approach, I guess, different grasses that have different seasons then, is what you're telling me, because they will go bad at a certain point.
biodiversity is good. Plants have different secondary compounds and chemistry, different protein levels. Forbes clover, for example, has higher protein than grass, even when it's dormant. And so to meet the needs of the animal, we need a diversity of plants, and that goes for our wildlife. As we want a diversity of wildlife, we need a diversity of plants to sustain that. There's millions of different microbes species, and they need biodiversity out there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good questions. Appreciate you bringing that in. So, so as we wrap things up here, I'm going to go ahead and share in the chat the link to be able to register for the next event with AgSteward. Again, this event is for basically the mission of AgSteward is to help family farmers and ranchers become profitable, regenerate the land that they steward, and create legacy businesses. That's the focus of all that we do here. Practices that James talked about and other presenters did on the 2-day summit, that's a key part of that. And so we encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity for you and your family. And James, just a quick story here, and then we'll I'd love to get a question. You can ruminate on this question, but what are the key driving factors of the profitability of any ranch? And we'll come back to that. But what we don't know can hurt us sometimes. Was out moving cattle quite a distance, young pairs, and sometimes they do a calf ran back, crawled through a fence into the neighbors, and so we went and we thought, well, the quickest thing is let's just rope this. And my wife was there and was going to bring the trailer, and we'd load it up and catch it back up. And anyway, I tracked up on it, and I think I missed. And Casey, the cowboy that was with us at that time, he was mounted really well. He tracked up on this calf, kind of stood up in his stirrups, getting ready to deliver, and then all of a sudden his horse just fell in this big cloud of dust, end over end. And Casey gets up and looks behind him, and he ran right into a 4-strand barbed wire fence. He didn't see it. He was so focused on getting that calf roped that his focus prevented him from seeing the obstacle that was before him. Sometimes I think we're in our businesses, we're like that, James. Like we're so focused on maybe even, it could even be being the best grazers in the world, that we can be going broke and we don't even know it. Like these indicators of profitability can come up on us, and all of a sudden we're like Casey, and we're standing and looking behind us like, what the heck happened to us? I thought I was doing things right. I thought that this was the way. I was following what the gurus told me to do. I was focusing on soil health. I was focusing on grazing, on getting my genetics right. But by golly, my economics were suffering, and I didn't know. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are the things that we need to monitor? And what are the driving factors that you've seen in your management tenure and experience that drive the profitability of farms and ranches?
Okay, thanks for that. I once read something that talked about the greatest factor of financially successful ranching was precipitation. We can't control that. Yeah. So what happens when it doesn't rain? What happens when life kicks us in the face? And so there's a few things here that came to mind. I made a few notes. One is having the right perspective. As we look at the current events that we have to adjust how far we look sometimes. Sometimes, like you say, we can be so focused in that we can't see the big picture. We can see that calf, but we can't see the surroundings. And so part of that is taking that time that we can zoom out. Maybe this is a spiritual reflection. Maybe it's a financial reflection. But we have to look at the right perspective. And by doing that, I think we have to be prepared. I was an Eagle Scout growing up, and so being prepared was kicked into my head for many years of being prepared for those unexpected things. Maybe this is an forage inventory. Maybe it's some finances. We've got a couple years of great forecast for the cattle market, but we know it's cyclic. We know there's going to be some bad years. Are we preparing for those bad financial markets where we have money set aside to help us get by? By knowing these numbers and knowing what it's going to take, there's too many operations that are one big drought from going bankrupt.
Yeah.
Are we prepared for that? So by knowing our numbers, we know how many animal days we need to get through a season. We know how many dollars need to get through the season to pay our bills. We know, are we one of those neighbors that only talks to our neighbor when we need something? Or are we one of those neighbors that are helping the neighbor when he has a fire, or he loses a haystack, or has a trial? So by being prepared and knowing those numbers of what our needs are, what our production costs are, there's a whole financial managerial accounting side of this to know what it costs you to run a cow. Don't just go buy a tractor when the tax accountant says you need to spend money. Know if you can afford it. Know if you need it. Know what those numbers are. And I think that to close up, Jared, you helped me in a lot of knowing that when we're tired, when we're beat down, that we don't quit. We rest. We need as much recovery as these plants and these ecosystems do. We've got to take that time to recover. So I think I probably went around in circles there, but
that's perfect. No, I think you addressed the subject, and just as a second witness, that recovery, nature is going to teach us what we need, and we think that we can just work, and hard work is the answer for everything. Well, that doesn't work in nature. Like, we can't just work our pastures hard continually every year. They need that recovery period, adequate recovery, and that's something that we teach our coaching clients and those that we consult with as well. To take it to the extreme, and which is an extreme, but I've got here on my desk the trilogy from Dan Sullivan, the three great books: Who Not How, The Gap and the Gain, and 10X is Easier Than 2X, that he co-authored with Benjamin Hardy. And Dan Sullivan, at the beginning of every year, or probably prior to the beginning of the year, but he plans 150 free days. 150 days where he is not going to work, where he is going to focus on recovery and rejuvenation. And because he does that on the days where he focuses, he's able to get a lot done. But on the free days, it's a 24-hour day where he doesn't think about work, doesn't listen to podcasts, doesn't read books, doesn't answer his phone. It is a day off. And how many of us as ranchers could we do that? For one reason, maybe our businesses won't support that. And in that case, we really don't have a business. We have a job. But two, would we go stir crazy? We do pretty good about taking Sundays off, but it's been a stretch to take additional days off for me. That's been something that we're learning and we're practicing. So I appreciated that you went there and brought it back full circle. So James, we appreciate it. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks everybody for joining. Those that are on here live, thanks for those who are listening to the podcast. We hope you'll join us again. We do these every second and fourth Thursdays. We just came on the tail end of a summit. You can access the recording to that. If you find the registration link, just go ahead and hit that registration, and that should automate you to get the recording back to you. Yeah, this is wonderful to be part of this industry, people who are striving to be good stewards of the land, to be regenerative, and you're definitely a great example of that, James. So thanks.
Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely.